hot sauce in my bag, swag.
So, as always, we're going to start with hot topics. Okay, so firstly, I wanted to talk about Chucky interviewing Murad Merali on his podcast. So, for you guys in the UK, you'll know Chucky's a pretty well-known personality here. He has his own podcast called the Half Cast Podcast. I'm not sure why it's called that, but every time I say it, I'm like, I just don't, why that name? Anywho, he also does a lot of interviews on different other platforms as well. His interviews for JD, The Duffel Bag are pretty... are the ones that will come to mind the most, but he's, you know, done a few interviews with a lot of different artists and like well-known influencers and entertainers and that kind of thing. So a few days ago he had Murad Merali on, and I don't want to say disgraced YouTuber because that sounds so dramatic, but essentially Murad Merali is mainly known for a lot of Love Island content. He also, you know, covers like pop culture, or used to cover pop culture, like Hot Topics, that type of thing. But it was mainly his videos about Love Island, and, you know, his interviews for Love Island as well pretty recently this year were really, really successful because he was pretty much the only one, like he was the go-to that people were going to get interviews outside of the villa that weren't like, you know, the crisp, clean-cut, Capital, Extra and This Morning type of interviews that where they don't really tell us anything, you know? So it kind of seemed like this year was like the making of like his big break kind of. And then recently he got exposed for engaging in a lot of race play, a lot of foot fetish kind of stuff. I don't judge, do you? But yeah, he said some pretty fucked up shit about black people. He, in particular, I don't have the tweet in front of me, but it was basically like, I think that he was kissing his feet, this black guy, and he was basically saying like, oh, like, look at this monkey kissing my feet, trigger warning, you know, like, he knows that all there'll ever be is niggas, da 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 da. So yeah, so that was the part for me that was like, oh, wow, okay, so this is who you are. But anyway, he was mainly targeting black women as a demographic. I don't even know if it was a target so much. That was mainly who the content was for. It was definitely aimed at, you know, black people as a whole. And obviously things like pop culture, hot topics, like reality stuff, it's generally going to be women that are interested in it. So it was, you know, a lot of black women that would be a big part of his viewership and his, you know, like that were his fans basically. And I really don't want to do that thing that's like, oh, I always knew there was something funny about him, because more time when people say that, it's like, did you really say that before? Or are you just saying that now that, you know, it's now a trend to hate this guy? But there was always something for me that hit disingenuous. I feel like people are more perceptive to realness and fakeness than a lot of people think. And I think that because I watch a lot of TV, I watch a lot of content, so I think by now, and sometimes you could be wrong because our perspective is our perspective at the end of the day, but there was just always something that felt like disingenuous about it for me. And I never thought that he was doing stuff like that, don't get me wrong, I could never have predicted that, but there was always something that made it a bit, like, I'm kind of good on you, and ultimately I didn't find him that entertaining either, so I wasn't really like a fan of his content. I checked out his videos once in a while when I was trying to spark ideas for what I wanted to do for my platform and stuff like that, but like as like a consumer or like someone that genuinely like engages and fucks with his, it wasn't really for me. And there was just always something about, like, I'm always very suspicious when people are so quick to like cape for us as black women, that aren't black women. It just always, like, sometimes even black men as well, like I have to really for a while really watch you and be like, is this really for real? Because if it is, you don't often question it. Maybe off at first, but it shouldn't really take you too long to realize like when someone's intentions are genuine. But when you kind of see them and you can't always help but side-eye them, it's like, sorry, I'm just jumping straight into my perspective, but I just want to give you guys a little background if you didn't know who Murad was. So Chucky interviewed him on his platform very recently, and he got a lot of backlash for it. I wasn't surprised because it's quite random for Chucky. If you watch his platform, it's usually more informal, and his guests will usually be his friends or like his co-hosts or artists, because he used to be a DJ, so I think he still does DJ occasionally. So music is more of his background, so he'll usually talk to artists. If it's going to be an interview, it would usually be with an artist, and he'll have like other podcasters on from time to time. But that's really it. It's not really the platform for like a serious conversation like that. Like sometimes obviously things like racism will come up because obviously, you know, him being a black man, he's going to talk about those topics, but it's really like more of a informal thing. So I think it was a combination of disappointment and surprise from people. So I wasn't surprised at the backlash, but Chucky had a lot to say. So he made a Twitter thread on the day the interview came out amidst all the backlash. He said, "I wasn't going to do this, but fuck it. If you know me, you know I'm not really doing all the arguing stuff on socials. I know what I'm doing and why I'm doing it. I'm a specialist at leaving people to argue amongst themselves and make their own conclusions, but let's go." Murad pod. If Murad was a white man speaking to a white audience and those videos came out, he wouldn't have been on the pod. Murad's audience was predominantly black and Asian women, some I respect. His audience and who he spoke to is a key factor in why this pod happened. Kink work and race play is a real thing. It really exists. So the questions are, can you take part in race play and not be racist? If so, the next question is, do you believe him? I questioned him to see what his truth was, purely because he was speaking to a black and Asian audience. Personally, considering the context above, I think it's fair to question him about it. Some of you might have been more happy to see me bully him, but I think that style of conversation is dead. Either way, it wasn't about me or you believing him. But as we are here though, this is a real question. Could someone pay you enough money to say racially problematic things to them in the bedroom when nobody is looking? 1 mil, 5 mil, 50? No, I would never, I hear you say. Sure. I kind of don't really understand the point of him posing that question. I feel like it's a little bit deflective. Like, yeah, sure, some people would say yes, some people would say no, but I don't really feel like it has anything to do with the interview. But anyway, but if someone could, in regards to your judgment on this, you can't have a problem with the act then. Your problem would then have to be with how much a person is willing to do it for. This changes the conversation and your outrage. Again, I feel like that's just pointless deflection because you actually can't predict what people would say or how they'd feel about it, because like I said, some people say yes, some people say no. Either way, it's not really of any consequence. I don't expect everyone to have the range for this type of conversation though. Even if you disagree with intellect, it's just because there are nuances. Whether you believe him is the question, and it's a fair one. But because of who he spoke to, his audience, and the things he talked about, adding the existence of kink, sex work, race play, it was fair to question him on it. And I think I did a good job of it, to be fair. Lol. You'd be surprised at what people are willing to do when nobody's looking, especially for money. Sidebar, I saw a few people say, no Jewish person gave Kanye a platform. We are so forgiving. Have a nibble on this. Lex Friedman, Jewish, talks with Kanye. I feel like a lot of what he said was irrelevant, to be honest with you, in terms of people being upset about the interview. At the end of the day, people have a right to feel some type of way if they feel like, you know, this is somebody who isn't as popular as he was or has lost out on opportunities because he has said racially derogatory things to black people. So to have a black content creator who targets towards a black audience, invite him on to give context to it, I can understand people feeling some type of way about it. However, on the other hand, as a content creator who is also planning on conducting interviews myself, I can totally understand why Chucky has a right to do that if he feels like it, kind of thing. Do you know what I mean? Like, I feel like sometimes people misunderstand the intention behind having someone on your platform and interviewing them, because me inviting someone to give them an interview doesn't automatically mean that I like them or I feel sorry for them, I understand them, or anything like that. Like, it doesn't automatically place me in alignment with them, you know? An interview is getting a story out of someone at the end of the day and putting on a platform for people to either watch or not watch. So I can definitely see both sides of the coin on that one. That being said, I watched the interview in full myself because I don't like to make judgment on just an idea of what happened. I really wanted to know how the interview was conducted. And I just felt like Chucky I feel like he's been doing what he's doing long enough to know that he would have got backlash for this, and bearing that in mind, he should have done it properly, in my opinion. I can understand why he feels like he did a good job based on how he would usually conduct an interview on the Halfcast podcast, because like I said, it's quite an informal platform, so that type of interview is not really something that he'd be known for. So he did all right in that aspect, but I feel like knowing what this interview was going to come with, he should have done a little bit more research on the complexities of sex work and research Murad a little bit, because it was really obvious that he really didn't know anything that much about him. He just he knew what happened. So I kind of feel like you really should have done that, and he also should have held him to task if he was going to do the interview at all. Like, if he wasn't going to hold him accountable, because I hear what you're saying, that he didn't want to bully him again. He didn't want to do like a Piers Morgan. I totally understand that, because that kind of comes off more as an argument than an interview, to be honest with you. So I do understand that, but at the same time, you could have held him accountable, because he allowed him to make excuses a lot and to basically contradict himself constantly. He repeated himself a lot. Don't get me wrong, there were a couple times where Chucky did outright ask him direct questions, and Murad would be very flaky about it and essentially repeat the same things that he'd been saying about how he was so desperate to get out of an abusive situation that he was living in, and all he could focus on was the bag. He said that constantly, the bag, and that, you know, he just wasn't thinking about it. Like, he had just what's the word I'm trying to say? Disassociated himself from what he was doing in his mind to be able to carry on, so that he could think about things. And my thing is, I feel like Chucky didn't press him enough, because I know it sounds so silly, but there were just little things that I was like, seemed inconsistent for me. For example, he contradicted himself, saying that he couldn't be open with it when he did eventually get a platform and tell people about his history, because he was scared about being able to go back to his country because he would get killed there, or that his family wouldn't fuck with him, like those kind of things. But then at another course in the interview, he said that he did want to tell people, he just didn't know how. And I was like, okay, so which is it? Like, you kind of contradicted yourself there. And I feel like Chucky should have really walked with him and asked him more pressing questions in the journey of him being a sex worker and saving up, because I really don't want to contradict someone's abusive surroundings, because I believe him in that aspect. Like, I would never contradict anyone. Abuse is so heinous and common, unfortunately, that I'm never really going to sit here and have a hard time when someone tells me that they've been through that situation, even though people do lie about it. More often than not, people are telling the truth. So I don't think he's being dishonest about that, but there is something that is ringing a bit weird for me in his process, because it sounds like he was saving up for a deposit to buy a house or buy a flat, which really threw me, because I was like, if you're living in an abusive situation and you are also having an abusive job as a sex worker, because he told stories about how he was abused by other people when he didn't do or say the things he wanted to say, when he asked why he would do race play and things like that. So you're being abused in your job to get out of an abusive situation as well. It's just abuse on every side. Why would you not rent? Like, do you know what I mean? Like, that to me, and I know that sounds so silly, like that's such a silly thread to pull, but like, it just, for me, if it's a matter of life and death, I'm saying at the very most, I'll do it for a few months and have enough to rent a place, and then I'll get a normal job. Do you know? I just really didn't understand, like, it just didn't make sense to me. I feel like, and that's why I said he kept referencing the bag, the bag, the bag. I feel like it's just something he did for money, that he's not sorry about, that he doesn't really feel like it was a big deal. Like, he didn't seem sorry or apologetic, or like, because for me, and that's what I will say about Chucky, and regardless of the fact that I felt like he could have done a much better job with interviewing, he didn't really press him enough, and I kind of feel like he probably shouldn't have bothered if he wasn't going to do it that way. But what I do like is that he did ask the only question that I wanted to know the answer to. Given your history, I'm paraphrasing, but this is essentially what he said to Murad, like, given your history and, you know, the things that you said and what you've done in regards to race play and the derogatory language you've used, why did you think it was appropriate to make the type of content you're creating and cater towards a black audience, knowing that you have history being, like, let's just, for me, yeah, cool, you're providing a service, but you were being racist in that service, so I can't separate that. Like, I'm sorry, like, when you're calling us monkeys and dirty niggas and we're all dirty, do you know what I mean? I can't say that you weren't racist. So yeah, like, why did you think it was appropriate, basically, is what Chucky asked him. Like, Chucky essentially applied, were you doing it out of guilt? And he basically said yes. Like, he said that, you know, he felt bad about some of the things. And what was crazy about that answer as well is that he wasn't even just talking about the race play and stuff. He was alluding to other things he might have said and done in his past, like maybe with colorism and racism towards other people. It's like, why did I behave this way? Like, why did I do these things? And like, you know, I went through therapy, and you do get to a point where you're like, oh, I want to educate myself. Like, okay, I want to do something about it. And I'm like, that is the biggest load of bullshit to me. I'm so sorry. Like, you not being a black person and knowing that you've been a part of behavior that was derogatory or harmful towards black people, why would you assign yourself the role or the right to try and educate people further, or try and, like, let's call it what it was. We were another bag to you. And that's why, to me, thinking back on the interview, him saying the bag constantly, I'm like, you're obsessed with making money, which is fine. A lot of us are. What do you think I'm doing here right now? We're trying to make money at the end of the day. But I feel like essentially black women are an easy audience to cater to. It for a lot of people that don't genuinely fuck with our community. They know that whether it be, you know, saying things of shock values get us outraged and still give them clicks and retweets in that way, or to cape for us, to be a savior. I think that he saw that very easy, being, you know, growing up in South London. He referenced that at the beginning of the interview, and having multiple black friends. I felt like he just thought it was something he could do. And he was like, yeah, I'm going to make money this way, because why couldn't you just do something else? Why couldn't you make content about something else? Like, for me, the fact that you probably still, every now and often when he needs the bag, he'll probably open up his OnlyFans account and go do some other shit. Do you know what I mean? So it's like, because he said there was no overlap with his, you know, him being a YouTuber and doing the sex work. But I'm sorry, I don't believe him. Like, I just think he struck me as someone who, anything for money. And like I said, his abusive situation might be a factor in that. And I really, really sympathise and empathise with him, because I always will where it comes to that type of thing with anybody. But at the end of the day, it's not an excuse. And I feel like, knowing if he was even a little bit sorry for what he had done and said in the past, he wouldn't have done that. He wouldn't have felt like it was appropriate to make money that way. That's how I see it. But yeah, in regards to Chucky doing the interview, I don't like look down on him for it or think badly of him. I do think he probably just did it for the bag. I'm not going to say that constantly the whole time, I promise. And I think that that's really all there is to it. I don't think he particularly cared about hearing Murad's story or thought it was that fascinating. Like, I just don't think that. I feel like Murad probably did the rounds and went to a lot of black content creators that have a black audience to try and plead his case. That's what I believe, because he also had an interview with Wumi Bello, which I didn't realise until this happened and I was seeing everybody's tweets. But apparently Wumi Bello did release a trailer and took it down. And I listened to this week's episode of Off the Cuff podcast. You guys should check them out. I really like Off the Cuff. They're one of my favourite podcasts here. And they were talking about this whole situation. And it appeared to most people that Wumi took the trailer down and never released the interview because of the backlash. But the guys on Off the Cuff were saying, like, apparently they've spoken to a couple people they know in the industry, and apparently Murad contacted Wumi and her people and said that he didn't want to have the interview go up anymore because he was in a bad place mentally at the time. So it seems, if that is true, that that wasn't the reason that the interview never was released. But ultimately, Wumi also did an interview with him. And I don't blame either her or Chucky, because at the end of the day, they're doing their job, you know? And I feel I somehow missed that tweet out of the thread. But I did remember Chucky also tweeting something like, you know, people tend to say like, oh, it's for the culture, and not really understand like what that means. Like, they have a certain expectation of what black podcasters and black content creators are supposed to do. And there's black people in this space that do all types of different content. Should they not do certain things because they, you know, some people find it like not for the culture type thing? And I did actually agree with that amid a separate conversation. But ultimately, sometimes I feel like, you know, there is a little bit of pressure on our people that are in the media space to not do or do certain things or have to fall in line. And I feel like where it's the context of an interview, I don't feel like they have to follow those boundaries. I'm sorry. Like, and again, I think that might be my bias because that's the content I want to make as well. But that's not really the purpose of an interview. So I don't feel like that should derail them or you know, discourage them from doing it. However, I think that maybe, and I'm not going to judge Wumi's interview because I haven't seen it, but for Chucky's, I think that he should have maybe weighed up whether it was worth it, and if it was to him, he should have maybe gone around the line of questioning and the interview in a different way. That's all I'll say. I don't really think that he has done something horribly wrong, but at the same time, I can definitely understand why people feel like, why? Like, why are you doing this? Especially since it's not the type of interview he'd usually have, like I said. So yeah, that's just my thoughts on the situation. And also, one thing I did forget to say as well is that the fact that Murad did clearly make the rounds and just is going to loads of black spaces to try and plead his case, you know, that is offensive, you know? But like, I think it's hard for me to feel that passionate towards what's going on because I never fought with him before anyway. Do you know what I mean? So it's like, ultimately, I think it would be a little bit different if he was someone that I felt like bamboozled by, or like, you know, didn't realize that he was doing these things and I was a fan of him, and now it's like, oh. But for me, it's kind of like, whoa, I didn't think it would be all of that, but I can't say I'm shocked because there was always something that hit disingenuous about him, and all I did was see that I was right. So yeah, but that's my thoughts on the situation anyway. You guys let me know what you think. I'm curious.
I got hot sauce in my bag, swag.